Welcome to our fourth session in our six-part series called Idea to Invoice. Hopefully you've been able to make the first four sessions, but if you haven't, what we've been looking at is we've been looking at how Acme Audio has been doing project management using SOLIDWORKS Manage. We then transitioned over how they were doing their electrical design, taking advantage of both SOLIDWORKS PCB and SOLIDWORKS schematics. And then last time, we looked at how Acme Audio was automating their design process, leveraging a tool called DriveWorks. What we'll be taking a look at today is process control and how Acme Audio is controlling a few different processes, but we're going to really focus on two. Now, before we get into what Acme Audio is doing, let's just define a few things and get a better understanding of what is a process. A process is essentially a roadmap on how we track the progress of some sort of predefined goal. Right? Think of Google Maps. It's getting from point A to point B. Now, I'm willing to bet a lot of you guys on this webinar are using SOLIDWORKS PDM in some form or fashion. And you might be asking yourself, well, Roland, what is a workflow? A workflow is a roadmap to track the status or state of a file. And these are really two discrete goals. So let's take a look at some examples of processes. Right? One example of a process very common to a lot of people is the engineering change request. This is a process of somebody requesting a change either internally or externally of the way that we're either creating something or designing a product. Another example would be the process of launching new product, right? This could be the prototyping process and that iteration of when you're actually taking a product to market. Another example is one called a material review board. And for some of my customers, when they're outsourcing material like plastic or sheet metal or maybe billet, and they're having an issue, sometimes they go through a process of really identifying and evaluating vendors and the material that comes into their facility. And then the last process, as far as examples is concerned, is a change order or an engineering change order, or what a lot of people call as ECO. And this is the actual process of changing the way that we create or the way that we're designing a product. What we'll be looking at today is we'll be looking at a formal ECR-ECO process. And what this is this is going to track the request of making a change along with the actual change itself, which is what we call an engineering change order. And then we'll drive some sort of notification or what some people refer to as an ECN. Now, what is Acme Audio currently doing? How are they tracking this? Well, they're using a combination of PDM, Excel, and a little bit of their ERP tool. Now, why is this not a good set of circumstances for Acme Audio? Well, the challenge is they really don't have a visibility of their change process. They don't have a way to account for who's requesting it and for the flexibility of depending on what type of change it is. On top of that, right now the way that they're tracking things is everything is disjoint, meaning the engineers, the production team, the quality team, and the sales team really aren't in one location seeing all the tasks and all of the changes that are happening. On top of that, they don't have a real way to assign ownership. And there's really not a lot of flexibility. So what we'll be looking at today, we're going to look at how SOLIDWORKS Manage can help you, and in this case, Acme Audio, control their process. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dig into SOLIDWORKS Manage, and let's take a look at how Acme Audio is doing this. The first thing that we want to show is how does a user see if something is in their workload? Well, the most common way is to leverage what we call a dashboard. And this was the big advantage for Acme Audio. This example, when I log into SOLIDWORKS Manage, I generally go straight to my dashboard and I can see very visually and dig into any ECRs that have been either requested or actually assigned to me. In this case, it is very interactive, so I can be digging through my dashboard and actually see a real-time view of the process of an open ECR, whether it's in the change committee, whether it's been started, or it's under request review. We can take a look at the technical feasibility, right? If it's something that we can actually implement. And along with that, as I dig down, I can actually see the revenue or the actual cost of these changes. Now, right off the bat, there's something really catching my eye, and that's the fact that I have an ECR that is pending review, and you'll notice that it's actually highlighted red. What this is this gives everybody in our organization great visibility to critical engineering change requests. So let's take a look at how this is actually going to work inside the system. Quite a few weeks ago, we looked at a new product launch, and we were actually leveraging a type of process of what we call project management. In this example, we're going to look at the engineering change request process. And right here, you're going to see that process ECR 0137. And what this is somebody's actually requested a change into our team, asking us to do something. In this case, we can see that the description is evaluate the housing of the assembly for the speaker. The reason for the change is reliability, and they've assigned this to critical. On top of that, me being an engineer, I can see that the originator was actually the client. So in this case, our customer is asking us to evaluate our housing assembly. Now, with that said, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and put all the appropriate information into this engineering change request and send this along the way so that way we can evaluate if this is something that we're actually going to be able to take on. Along with that, if this is going to be a change that we're going to be implementing, we want to understand what's going to happen both to current inventory and future price changes. Now, the way that this is going to work is I actually want to start off with the history. Every engineering change request is going to come in, and we are going to evaluate and see if this is something we're going to do. And the way that we do that is we've predefined our process. So we're going to review the request. It's going to then go into a change committee. So depending on what kind of change this is, it gets allocated to the right people. At which point, once we evaluate this, we will approve it, and it'll turn it into what we call an ECO or a change order. Or if it's something that we don't think we can implement, we'll go ahead and reject this and let the requester know why we're rejecting. So let's take a look at some of the properties of this ECR. The first thing is as what you're going to see is when you accept the process, in this example, I'm getting assigned as the evaluator. Part of this evaluation is we have some tasks that we want to run to make sure that this is a change that we can actually implement. These tasks can be both default tasks that get created, in this case, a feasibility study along with the cost-benefit analysis. In this case, we want to create a task that's going to go ahead and assign a simulation study to one of our mechanical engineers so they can actually evaluate the real-life scenario virtually before we implement this change. To do that, I'm just going to simply create a new task and say run sim study for eval. We want to assign this to somebody so that way we know who's going to actually be responsible for this work. In this case, we're going to find one of our mechanical engineers, Mr. Travis Jones. And what's really awesome about this tool is we want to attach the actual item out of our vault that's going to be evaluated. So what does this do? This gives us visibility to the thing that's actually going to be changing. In this example, what we're going to do is we're going to sort this by our file name, and we're going to grab the appropriate speaker assembly that's going to be evaluated. In this case, we're going to grab our AMP assembly housing, and we're going to add that into our task. That way, Mr. Travis Jones knows exactly what he's going to be reviewing. Now, while Travis does that, let's go ahead and add some related documents. Now, related files is a way to attach supplementary information that's not necessarily always revision controlled. Some examples of this could be an email that maybe comes in from your customer, or maybe it's some supporting documentation that you got off of a vendor website. In this case, we're going to actually attach the feasibility study that we've completed to make sure this is something that we actually can do. Since we've created our feasibility study, we'll go ahead and mark our task as completed. And that gets this ready for our next stage. Now, one really neat thing is as I'm working, I can get real-time feedback from my other team members. In this example, if we go look at the comment section, we can see that Mr. Travis Jones has actually already created the simulation. Simulation results show material to be a little bit too thin. So we can go ahead and mark his task as being complete, and now we have our marching orders of what needs to be done. It appears that this housing probably needs to be made of a little bit thicker material. So how do we do that? What we're going to first do is we're going to come up to our properties of our ECR, and we want to go ahead and attach the housing that is in question. Very similar to the way that we created a task, to this ECR, we want to attach all affected items. These are things that are going to be affected by this ECR that are actually going to have to be changed inside SOLIDWORKS. In this case, from our simulation results, we've determined that the housing is made out of just a little bit too thin of a gauge material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search my project that we're working on. We're going to see there is our housing for the amp and the speaker. If I'm not sure if that's the right model, again, Manage and SOLIDWORKS PDM are integrated with each other, so I have a great visibility into the actual vault. In this example, before attaching this, I can actually get into that document preview and take a look and make sure this is the thing that I'm actually looking for. In this case, it absolutely is, so we're going to go ahead and add that as an affected item to this ECR. Now, what does that mean for you? What this means is, as I process this ECR, my engineering change request and in turn my engineering change order are going to change the status of the workflow of this file that is in PDM. Right now, this is an approved file since we've been making it. So you'll actually notice that the current rev is A, and Manage is very intelligent. It knows that once this ECR is done, it's giving the user the visibility so that way they know what the next revision is going to be. Now, one of the biggest challenges for Acme Audio is that when they change something, they're not always really good at grabbing all of the affected items. So what SOLIDWORKS Manage is giving you access to is essentially the where used. In this example, if I right click on this, I can tell Manage to go ahead and add any related records. So what does that actually mean? Well, this part that I'm going to be changing the gauge thickness of the housing on is actually used in a few different places. I can see that this part is used in this assembly and is also detailed out in this drawing. So Manage is now capturing all of those references, and it's giving you that visibility into what's actually being affected, hence the name affected items. If this part was used on multiple projects, I would see this list get very large, and I could pick and choose which items I would actually want to be changing. In this example, I want to go ahead and make sure all affected items are going to be updated. It's as simple as giving that a quick checkbox and going ahead and telling Manage to add it into my affected items list. Now that we have all of our information in the affected items, let's fill out our last little bit of information for this ECR. Well, hypothetically, we've evaluated this and we can say, is this technically feasible? Absolutely. We're just changing the material for a thicker gauge material. The cost from our feasibility report, we're going to say it's going to actually cost us $15 per part. Now, all of these items in this case are mandatory. So this is helping Acme Audio not forget any important information that needs to be included for each engineering change request that comes in. If a rule has not been completed, it will go ahead and warn the user and prevent them from moving on to the next stage. Once we have that, let's go ahead and save this and send it to the next stage of our engineering change process. Now that I've captured all of this, this is actually going to go into what we call a change committee. So this is part of my process and part of our ISO requirement that we're actually getting all of the key members involved. In this case, we really only need one person. And in my organization, I happen to be that person. So I'm going to go ahead and grab myself and assign myself as part of this change committee. Now, earlier I said this is giving you flexibility. You'll see that I can actually have this as a parallel or sequential approval process. So one of the very common scenarios that I see is they say, hey, Roland, once the engineering team says, yes, we can do this, we want to go ahead and include our production team, and they need to sign off on that. And then after the production team signs off, we want to go ahead and update our sales team so that way they can update any cost, if this is going to be more expensive or less expensive, to make sure that we're charging the appropriate amount. So again, SOLIDWORKS Manage is giving you this flexibility just like it is Acme Audio. In this example, I'm the only team member that really needs to sign off on this, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. As I progress through the history of this engineering change request, you're going to see a real-time progress update in my interface. So what is this good for? This is letting any key members who are part of this change process know where we at of the request, right? The progress of it. So let's go ahead and finish this up so that way we can actually get this ready for implementation. Now, I'm the key member that's part of this change committee, so I'm going to go ahead and accept this process at the next stage. Now, this is pretty simple for me to send along. The decision is yes, we're going to go ahead and approve this for implementation. We're going to say, as our comments, we're going to say ran simulation, determine material needs to be thicker. And we're going to send this along to the next stage. Now what this is going to do when I click this send to next stage is that it's going to complete out the change request. So it's going to notify everybody via an email that this change request has now gone from a request to a change order. And it's automatically going to create my change order, and it's going to automatically tag these files in PDM from approved to under change. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to say send to next stage. Manage is going to warn me, are you sure? Yes, I am. We can see this change request has now been completed. And right here on the change order, you're going to see that this ECR has now created an engineering change order. If I right click on this, I can go ahead and go to that record in SOLIDWORKS Manage. We can see here is our evaluate housing assembly. Clicking on the properties and opening this guy up, we can see that our affected items have been tagged into this change order, and all of the information that was already tagged into our ECR has been brought over into our ECO. Now there is a key right here. When we get an ECO, we can actually define this as essentially two ways to process this. In Acme Audio's case, they have what they call an express and a standard ECO. And this is totally customizable to what you're doing. Now, say you have some new team members and they're not sure, which process should they use. Should this be an express or a standard? What SOLIDWORKS Manage does really well is it puts a lot of valuable information right at your fingertips. In this case, for Acme Audio, by simply coming over here into Manage, I can actually have Manage tell the user and give them the roadmap and an explanation of what the roadmap is. In this case, it's pretty simple. An express engineering change order is a change order that the engineering team is responsible for and that they don't have to plan out because it's not going to be affecting any inventory. If inventory is going to be infected, then we need to go into what we call a standard ECO. And again, this is the vernacular that Acme Audio is using. You could use different names for different things. And all that means is if we are affecting inventory, whether it's inventory that's already in the field or inventory that's been ordered, or maybe there's actually a product that's already on the shop floor that needs to be modified, we need to develop a plan for the way that we're going to allocate for that inventory. In this example, no inventory is going to be affected. We're going to use up what we have. So we're going to go ahead and leverage our Express and push this right down through. Now, in some cases, right, a team member might need more information, right? So more instructions. So right here at their fingertips, if they click on the stage notes, this actually is going to give them the exact instructions and what each one of these properties is actually doing. So again, we're just trying to help them along the way to fill out any important information. So let's keep on going. So what are the change details? In this case, the change is going to be specifically is modify housing to 14 gauge sheet metal. Any product that is already in design, we're going to modify. So if we're designing it, we're going to go ahead and update it. If it's in the field, we're going to let it be used as is. If it's already on order, we're going to go ahead and use as is. Now, what's really important here is we want to go ahead and assign this to an engineer, right? So the same way that we assigned the simulation to make sure it was something that we could actually do, we want to assign this to the person who's going to now go and implement the change. Now, in this example, the change is literally going to be opening up a SOLIDWORKS model and updating the part, updating the assembly, and then in turn updating the detailed drawing view. But this could be totally outside of SOLIDWORKS. Maybe you're using AutoCAD for a layout, or maybe this change is actually changing the way that you manufacture something, and it's actually changing the way that the work order is processed through your shop floor. In this example, in the most traditional sense, it's usually corresponding to an engineering part or an engineering assembly or engineering drawing. That doesn't always have to be the case. Now, along with that, I want to give our manufacturing team a better visual of what's actually going to be happening to the bill of material. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here into this bill of material tab, and we want to give everybody in the organization a visual of what's changing on the bill of material. So what I'm going to tell Manage is I'm going to say I want to copy a current bill of material from the actual product that we're currently creating, right? Revision A. The way that I do that is I'm simply going to say, let's go into our vault. I am searching for our assembly, and I don't actually remember the exact name of it, so I'm going to just type in a wildcard of WT, which is the name of the system that we've actually created. Once I find the appropriate assembly, in this case, part number 41110, I'm going to go ahead and select it and hit OK, and then I'm going to tell Manage to go ahead and bring that bill of material in. So what it's doing is it's read in the bill of material from our SOLIDWORKS assembly, and what I'm doing right now is I'm letting everybody know that in this case, we're going to be modifying. So the thing that we're changing is actually the housing for the amp and the speaker. Once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now you're going to see here in a little bit when I actually send out this change notification where this is really important. Right now, or prior to Acme Audio having SOLIDWORKS Manage, it was real tough to be able to actually create a report of what the actual change of the BOM was. So this is giving everybody in our organization a good idea of what's actually going to be happening. In this case, if we go back to our properties of our engineering change, we can see the three things that are going to be changing rev are going to go from A to B. There's our housing. There's the assembly the housing is in, and there's the drawing of that assembly. Once we have that, we're going to send our engineering change order on to the next stage of our process. Now, as we go through here, what I want you to know is that everything inside Manage can be brought in from other databases. In this case, we're bringing in the database from actual SOLIDWORKS PDM. We can link to maybe your ERP tool. We can link to essentially Excel files. So maybe you have a bunch of metadata that's already in Excel that you wanted to bring in here and leverage inside a process. So Manage gives you much better flexibility into controlling all of your data. Now, before we go and actually implement that change, if I come back over here to my home screen and I go look at my dashboard, you're going to see that that critical ECR has now been removed. Another way that you can see information or see things that are assigned to you specifically is by going to the My Work tab. When you go to the My Work tab, you can filter out things that are either documents or records, projects you've been assigned, or in this case, processes. So if I go click on processes, you'll see there's the ECO process that is actually in my bucket, or essentially in my responsibility to finish out. So this ECO is essentially assigned to me. The awesome thing about this is directly from my dashboard or from your work dashboard, you can toggle into those records and go and actually start manipulating and working on them. Now, one thing that you're going to see is that that process has taken those 3 files and removed them from the approved state into the under change state. So if I were to come back over here into SolidWorks PDM, which is the vault that all my engineering data is being stored in, that's kind of like our bank account, and I go find those files, there's that speaker housing, you'll see that if I right click on this and I go look at the history, you'll notice that this went from the approved state into the under change state without me actually having to come in here and actually go and find every single file. Now, how did that happen? The way that happened is the process is your overlying control mechanism, and your workflow is the mechanism to actually control the status of the file and control the permissions of the file. At this point, being a SolidWorks user, I would go ahead and come in here and check this file out and make all the appropriate changes. For the sake of time, we're going to assume that this change has been implemented. The users updated the model, updated the drawing, and finished the detailing out. Now, one thing I want to call note is if you are a SolidWorks user and a PDM user, you'll notice that when you're leveraging Manage within SolidWorks, there is a new tab inside your PDM environment called SolidWorks Manage. This gives you visibility to everything that you saw in the Manage interface directly inside Windows Explorer. So for example, if I were to click on this part and go into that Manage tab, I could see the Where Used tab, and I would notice that this right here is being affected by this ECR, which in turn turned into an ECO. So this is giving you all of that information that you need, whether you are a SolidWorks user, a PDM user, or just a Manage user. From here, I'm going to go ahead and open up this record, and let's go ahead and finish this ECO out. We're going to accept the process. We're going to put our comments in here. We're going to say completed updates of parts and detailed drawings. We'll give this a quick save, and then we'll send this to the next stage. Now, sending it to the next stage is essentially your way of saying, hey, I'm done with this, move it along. In this example, and for Acme Audio, their engineering change order and their engineering change request process is very similar to a lot of what my customers are doing, right? I see some customers that do have variations, but for the most part, everybody's doing something fairly similar. Now, if we come back over here into our ECO and we go ahead and open this guy up. So what has happened so far? Let's take a look. If we look at the history of this, we can see that the ECO was created. We defined it as an express, meaning we were not affecting inventory in this case. We sent it to WIP, at which point we implemented our change. Once our change was implemented, we then told SolidWorks Manage that we were done and that everything was good. We reviewed it, and it ended up in that finished state. I'll now see my progress bar is set to 100%, meaning this ECO has been completed. If I were to come over here and open this up and look at my affected items, you'll notice that the current rev is set to B. And if you were a SolidWorks user, right, or a PDM user, you'll notice that when I come back over here into PDM, that those 3 files, right, the drawing, the assembly, and the speaker housing, are now back in the approved state. Looking at the data card, you'll notice that the revision now went from A to B. And if I were to right click on any of these inside PDM and look at the history, you're going to see that my overall process, right, this thing that we were using to track both task and affected items and related documents, is now also interacting directly with the workflow within PDM. That way, we can ensure that no files are getting left behind and that no checkoff is being bypassed. Now, the last thing that we want to talk about before we open it back up for questions is how do we notify everybody in the organization that this change has been completed? Well, in some cases, people formalize it with an ECN, right, which usually stands for an engineering change notification. In our example, we can do 2 things. The first thing is you can run a report. So by simply right-clicking on this file and choosing Run Report, I have an ECN report. And so what is this report doing? This report is actually giving everybody a visual of what this change has encompassed. We can see that it first came in as a request. It was requested by me. We can see the estimated cost of the change was going to be $15 per part. It was set to critical, and the feasibility of implementing it was very high. We captured all of our information, so there's our description and our comments. Going into the planning stage, we're grabbing that information out. For things that are in design, we're going to modify it. In the field, use as is, and on order, we're going to go ahead and use as is. Modify the housing to 14 gauge. Affected items. This was all of the items that were affected by this change. So by changing that sheet metal thickness, we actually were affecting multiple drawings, sub-assemblies, and top-level assemblies. And then over here, the BOM markup, we now have visibility on this engineering change notice of what actually is different in this bill of material. And in this case, it was just a simple modification. What's really awesome about this is that the user does not have to log into the system to get this change notification. Upon completion of our engineering change order, we actually have an automatic task that is generating that report and emailing it out to each key member of our organization. So in conclusion, what has Acme Audio accomplished here? They have used SOLIDWORKS Manage to get many processes under control, but in this case, specifically the engineering change request and engineering change order process. In a nutshell, the way that they modify product and modify the way that they create things. The big benefit is by formalizing this and putting everybody in a single system, they're able to repeat the change process over and over and over, document that, and ensure that nothing goes unforgotten or unseen. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and open it up for questions and kick it back over to our moderator for a quick poll. But before I do, let's talk about what we have in store for our next session. We've looked at project management and system design using electrical PCB and schematic, design automation, and today we leverage SOLIDWORKS Manage to actually control our engineering change process. Next week, what we'll be looking at the manufacturing side for Acme Audio. Specifically, we'll be looking at how they leverage their CNC equipment and how they can program their equipment more effectively. And along with that, we'll be looking at how Acme Audio is leveraging additive manufacturing, aka 3D printing, inside their manufacturing environment. Not just for prototyping, but actually for creating production parts.